Tonight, the United States is walking into a football match against a country that most Americans couldn't find on a map an hour ago. But here's the thing, this tiny nation of 3.3 million people isn't just some random World Cup underdog. It's a country with three presidents, yes, three, all ruling at the same time. It's a country where a single assassination in one city started World War I. It's a country that was under siege for almost 4 straight years, the longest siege of a capital city in modern history. And it's a country where, still today, you can walk down the street and see bullet holes in buildings next to brand new coffee shops. This is Bosnia and Herzegovina, and by the end of this video, you'll understand why the Dragons, that's their actual nickname, are one of the most fascinating teams to ever set foot on a World Cup pitch. Bosnia and Herzegovina sits in the middle of the Balkan Peninsula in Southeast Europe, wedged between Croatia, Serbia, and Montenegro. It has a tiny 20-kilometer stretch of coastline on the Adriatic Sea, just enough to technically be a coastal country, not enough to actually build a proper port. The name itself is a clue to how complicated this place is. It's not one region, it's two. Bosnia is the larger northern part, mountainous and continental. Herzegovina is the smaller southern part, drier and Mediterranean. Two regions, one country, and, as you're about to find out, one government system so complicated that political scientists use it as a textbook example of what not to do. But to understand how Bosnia got this way, we have to go back. Way back. Part 1. Before Bosnia was Bosnia. Long before anyone called this land Bosnia, it was home to the Illyrians, a collection of tribal peoples who lived across the Western Balkans thousands of years ago. The Romans eventually conquered the region and folded it into the province of Illyricum, building roads and forts through mountains that, frankly, nobody else wanted to bother building through. When the Roman Empire collapsed, the region became a battleground between competing powers, and eventually, in the 6th and 7th centuries, Slavic tribes migrated in and settled permanently. These Slavic settlers are the direct ancestors of the people who live in Bosnia today. For centuries afterward, Bosnia existed as a contested borderland, pulled between the Byzantine Empire, the Kingdom of Croatia, and Hungary, none of whom ever fully controlled it. The mountains made it nearly impossible to conquer and hold. That single geographic fact that Bosnia is brutally difficult terrain is going to become a theme you hear again and again in this story. Part 2. A medieval kingdom with its own religion. By the late 12th century, Bosnia had its own local ruler known as a Ban, and the most famous of them, Ban Kulin, presided over a period of relative peace and independence in the 1180s and the 1190s. Here's where it gets strange. Medieval Bosnia developed its own distinct religious institution known as the Bosnian Church. Both the Catholic Church in Rome and the Orthodox Church in Byzantium considered it heretical, and for centuries it existed as a kind of religious island, neither fully Catholic nor fully Orthodox. Crusades were even launched against Bosnia specifically because of this. Imagine a country so stubborn about doing its own thing that neighboring superpowers sent armies just to make it fall in line, and it still did not. In 1377, Bosnia reached its peak as an independent medieval kingdom when Tvrko I had himself crowned king. For a brief window, Bosnia was a legitimate, self-governing European kingdom with its own nobility, its own currency, and its own church. That independence would not last. Part 3. The Ottomans arrive and everything changes. In 1463, the Ottoman Empire conquered the Kingdom of Bosnia, and what happened next explains almost everything about the country's religious makeup today. Under Ottoman rule, large numbers of the local population gradually converted to Islam, making Bosnia the region of Europe with the largest concentration of native European Muslims. This wasn't the case with most conquered territories. Historians point to a mix of factors. The weakness and unpopularity of the old Bosnian church made conversion easier, and converting often came with real economic and social advantages under Ottoman rule, including lower taxes and access to administrative careers. Sarajevo, founded by the Ottomans as an administrative center, exploded into one of the most important cities in the Balkans, filled with mosques, bathhouses, covered markets, and caravanserais. Under the Ottoman millet system, different religious communities, Muslims, Orthodox Christians, Catholics, and eventually Sephardic Jews who fled the Spanish Inquisition and settled in Sarajevo, lived side by side, each governing their own religious and civil affairs. For centuries, Sarajevo functioned as one of Europe's genuinely multi-religious cities. Long before multiculturalism was a word anyone used, this religious diversity is the seed of literally everything that happens later in the story, the good and the catastrophic. Part 4. The spark that started a world war. As Ottoman power weakened in the 19th century, Austria-Hungary moved in, occupying Bosnia in 1878 and formally annexing it in 1908. And then on June 28, 1914, in the streets of Sarajevo, a 19-year-old Bosnian Serb nationalist named Gavrilo Princip shot and killed Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria-Hungary and his wife Sophie. That single act in this one city, in this one country, triggered a chain of alliances that plunged the entire planet into the First World War. Bosnia didn't just witness history, it ignited it. Part 5. 2 World Wars and a Socialist Experiment. After World War I, Bosnia became part of the newly formed Kingdom of Yugoslavia, a union of South Slavic peoples. Then came World War II, and it hit Bosnia harder than almost anywhere else in Europe. The territory was absorbed into the fascist, independent state of Croatia, whose Ustasha regime carried out mass atrocities against Serbs, Jews, and Roma. At the same time, Bosnia became one of the main battlegrounds for Josip Broz Tito's communist partisan resistance movement. In fact, in the small Bosnian town of Jajce in 1943, partisan leaders held a conference that laid the constitutional foundation for what would become socialist Yugoslavia after the war. Under Tito's Yugoslavia, Bosnia and Herzegovina was recognized as one of 6 constituent republics, and its multi-ethnic identity, Bosniak Muslims, Orthodox Serbs, and Catholic Croats living together, was actively promoted as a symbol of brotherhood and unity, Tito's official slogan for holding the whole federation together. Sarajevo even hosted the 1984 Winter Olympics, presenting the city to the world as a modern, cosmopolitan, multi-ethnic capital. 8 years later, that same city would be under siege. Part 6. The War. When Yugoslavia began breaking apart in the early 1990s, Bosnia and Herzegovina faced an impossible situation. Unlike Slovenia or Croatia, Bosnia had no single dominant ethnic group. It was roughly split between Bosniaks, Serbs, and Croats. In a 1992 independence referendum, the majority voted for independence, but Bosnian Serb political leaders rejected it and, backed by the Yugoslav army, moved to carve out their own territory. What followed from 1992 to 1995 was the Bosnian War, the deadliest conflict in Europe since World War II. The Siege of Sarajevo lasted approximately 1,425 days, nearly 4 years. It remains the longest siege of a capital city in the history of modern warfare. Civilians dodged snipers just across the street. A stretch of one boulevard became so lethal it was nicknamed Sniper Alley. People queuing for bread or water were shelled. In July 1995, in the town of Srebrenica, which had been declared a UN-safe area, Bosnian Serb forces systematically murdered more than 8,000 Bosniak men and boys. It is the only event in the Bosnian War that international courts have formally classified as genocide, and it remains the worst atrocity committed on European soil since the Holocaust. The war finally ended in late 1995 with the Dayton Peace Agreement, negotiated in Dayton, Ohio, which stopped the fighting but created a governmental structure so bizarre it is still causing problems today. Part 7. The most complicated government on Earth. Here's the part of the story that sounds made up but isn't. The Dayton Agreement split Bosnia and Herzegovina into 2 semi-independent entities, the Federation of Bosnia and Herzegovina and Republika Srpska, plus a small self-governing area called the Brčko district that belongs to both entities and neither at the same time. On top of that, the country is run by a rotating tripartite presidency, meaning 3 presidents, 1 Bosniak, 1 Serb, and 1 Croat, who share power and rotate the chairmanship every 8 months. Layer on top of that 10 separate cantons within the federation, each with its own government, its own parliament, and its own ministries, and you end up with a small country of 3.3 million people that, depending how you count, has well over 100 government ministers across all levels combined. Political scientists regularly cite Bosnia and Herzegovina as one of the most complex systems of governance anywhere in the world, a peace deal so focused on preventing another war that it accidentally built one of the least efficient governments on the planet. Part 8, Life in Bosnia today. And yet, walk through Sarajevo today, and you won't just find political dysfunction. You'll find something remarkable. Scattered across the city are the Sarajevo roses, spots where mortar shells exploded during the siege, later filled with red resin as makeshift memorials embedded directly into the pavement. Bullet-scarred building facades still stand next to renovated cafes and glass office towers. Sarajevo is quite literally a city where you can see the war and the recovery in the same city block. Coffee culture runs deep. Bosnian coffee, prepared in a small copper pot called a dzezva, is a slow social ritual, not a quick caffeine fix. Cevapi, small grilled minced meat sausages served in flatbread, is treated less like fast food and more like a point of regional pride, with cities arguing over who makes it correctly. And here's the part that sounds unbelievable but isn't. Parts of Bosnia are still marked "Do Not Cross" today. More than 30 years after the war ended, roughly 774 square kilometers of Bosnian territory, about 2% of the entire country, is still suspected to contain landmines, much of it running along the old front lines that now separate the country's two entities. Warning signs with skull and crossbone symbols are still a normal part of the landscape in rural areas, especially around towns like Doboj, Travnik, and the hills surrounding Sarajevo. In August 2025, a 19-year-old man was killed in Doboj after wandering into a marked minefield. A young man born years after the war ended, killed by a conflict he never lived through. Bosnia remains one of the most mine-contaminated countries on Earth, and full clearance, originally promised for 2019, has been pushed back again and again, with officials no longer confident it will be finished even by the end of this decade. And in Mostar, in Herzegovina, the Stari Most, the Old Bridge, is one of the most photographed spots in the Balkans. Built by the Ottomans in the 16th century, it was deliberately destroyed by shelling in 1993 during the war, then rebuilt stone by stone using traditional techniques and reopened in 2004. Today, it's a UNESCO World Heritage Site, and locals still dive off it into the river below as a rite of passage, a tradition that dates back centuries. Part 9, How a Tiny, War-Scarred Nation Built a Football Powerhouse, which brings us back to tonight. Bosnia and Herzegovina's men's national team is nicknamed Zmajevi, the Dragons. Several of its greatest players, including record goal scorer Edin Dzeko, were born during or right around the war years, growing up amid the same siege lines and shortages this video just described. Dzeko has spoken about growing up in wartime Sarajevo, where football pitches doubled as some of the only places kids could still be kids. That a country this small, this politically fractured, and this recently devastated by war can consistently produce elite footballers competing on the world's biggest stage isn't a coincidence. It is a direct extension of the resilience running through this entire story. From a medieval kingdom with its own outlawed religion, to the spark of a world war, to the longest siege of a capital city in modern history, to a government with 3 presidents at once, Bosnia and Herzegovina might be one of the strangest, most resilient, and most misunderstood countries on the planet. So tonight, when the USA takes the field against the Dragons, remember, you are not just watching a football match. You're watching a nation that has survived almost everything history could throw at it, still standing, still fighting, still here. If you learned something today, subscribe for more deep dives into the world's most fascinating countries, because trust me, this is far from the craziest one we've got coming.